Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 156th episode of Hawkblogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser, and this is the day of days for a lot of people in the NFL, a lot of players, a lot of coaches. This is when some people will have their dreams realized, become an official member of a 53-man roster. Other people will have their careers ended. Veterans that see that the road is closing, is winding down. Others will have a bump in the road and won't be able to necessarily be on the roster, but hope to be on practice squads. All of that will happen at 1 p.m. Pacific time today, by 1 p.m. Pacific time today. We are already getting news of certain moves ahead of time. The Seahawks do not tend to be one of those teams that releases these ahead of time. The bulk of today's show will be the best thing that we can possibly do, which is welcome Mike Randle back on from FTN Fantasy. And by the way, this episode, like all episodes, is brought to you by FTN Fantasy. So want to really recognize FTN Fantasy as the best place to get all your fantasy football information. In fact, we're going to talk about that today and some of the tips that I've started to pick up from that. You want to use promo code HAWKS, and you also want to make sure you sign up for at least Fantasy Football Plus, because that's the one that gets you Stats Hub. That's the one that gets you access to all the DVOA data, and it's less than $8 a month with the promo code. So absolute steal to do it. You want to do that. Before we bring Mike on, I kind of gave you a preview. Mike's waiting off stage, so you know he's there. He's waiting with bated breath. I want to make sure that folks know that there's a couple rules for the day in terms of the way waivers works. And so this is just information you guys should have, and a couple things here. So there's different types of players that are waived. There are veteran players that have had at least 4 or more years of service. Those folks are called, I believe they're called vested veterans. And if they're released, they can immediately be signed by another team. If they are not a vested veteran, if they're one of the younger players, then they have to go through a waiver claim process. So they cannot just go wherever they want. So Siake Ika was waived by the Cleveland Browns today. He was just drafted last year in the 3rd round. He's a nose tackle. We know the Seahawks are potentially interested. He is subject to waivers, which means that teams can claim players subject to waivers on the reverse of the draft order. So the Seahawks would be 16th in that order if they wanted to put in a waiver claim. That will also be the case with the players the Seahawks waive. So if they were to waive George Halani, if they were to waive, let me pick another one, Nelson Caesar or Jamie Sheriff, all of those guys would be subject to waivers and could be selected in order of draft order. So just be aware of that. The other thing is PUP list. So we should expect to find out today that Abe Lucas, PUP. We should expect to find out Cameron Young, most likely PUP, Jarek Reed, PUP. Those guys physically unable to perform will not be eligible to come and play for the Seahawks for the first 4 weeks of the season. Similarly, there is a rule that I talked about yesterday that for IR, this is a new rule this year, that unlike past years, you used to have a player on the initial 53-man roster before you put them on IR. That's no longer the case for 2 players. You can select 2 players that on today you designate as an early return IR, and they can go on IR today and be eligible to come back after 4 weeks. So not 6 weeks, not 8 weeks, not the full season. I think the expectation is that's the case for Uchenna Nwosu. Given the news yesterday that was confirmed, it sounds like he has an MCL sprain. So we should expect to hear that Uchenna Nwosu is going to be put on that short-term IR. He'll be eligible to come off that after 4 weeks, and we'll see if that's what they ultimately do. He did post yesterday BRB on X, and so maybe there's some expectation that maybe he'll avoid it, but I'm not holding out a lot of hope. I would expect we're going to see something along the lines of IR for Uchenna Nwosu. As far as the way that the waivers work, it will be Wednesday, so not today, Wednesday by 9 a.m. Pacific time. So almost 25 hours from right now, the league will process the waiver claims that are submitted, and we'll find out who gets who. So I just wanted everybody to have a little bit of information about what's going on today. We'll certainly talk more about that from there, but definitely some moves of interest. But keep an eye out as well. If you haven't clicked subscribe, clicked like, and made sure you click the bell to get notified when I go live. Today is going to be one of those days. I could be going live 3-4 times today. I can't tell you when or why. It'll depend on the moves that happen. It'll depend on when announcements come out. You're going to want to click that bell to get notified. I will be at the VMAC later today. There'll be some player interviews that we'll be doing. We'll be there after this roster decision. So make sure you have clicked the bell to get notified and subscribe to the channel. We're closing in on 12,000 subscribers. Would love to get there before we start the season. All right. With that, it's time. I can't wait any longer. You know, I'm too excited to wait any longer. I got to bring in Mike Randle of FTN Fantasy. Mike, man, I know your team is not the Seahawks. Remind everybody who your team is.
Well, I'll tell you this. Growing up, Brian, here it is. Now, I want to caution you. I am not a Cowboy fan. I am not. That was me growing up when I was a young kid. Jerry Jones, his moves have been horrific. I am simply agnostic. I am team agnostic. I am drinking out of a Cowboys cup, but I can assure you, Brian, as we go through this entire season, which I'm blessed to be with you, I will criticize the Cowboys more than anyone else. So please know I am objective, but I am drinking out of a Cowboys cup. Full disclosure today. I apologize to all your fans here.
Understood. There was actually Josina Anderson posted something last night about Cowboys are always keeping it interesting. And I got to say, it's not because the Cowboys are shoved down our throats as like a national team that people cover all the time, but I just find them a very uninteresting team. I certainly like Micah Parsons as a player. CeeDee Lamb just got a big bag and he's an amazing receiver. Dak Prescott, he's a good quarterback, but generally, I find that team uninteresting. I don't think they're a true contender. I don't think that they've been a true contender for a while. And they just seem like perpetually not good enough. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, I don't know, a good comparison. Like
the Yankees? The New York Yankees?
Well, the Yankees have won a lot of championships.
But not recently, Brian. That's the point. Not recently.
I mean, they won in the 2000s, though. They won in this century, century, didn't they?
Yeah, the last time the Cowboys won, I remember because I was back in college. It was the 92 to 96 run, that whole area. But I think what's happened is, first of all, America's team, I don't believe in that anymore because of social media, because of all the things that we do. All teams can become popular across the country. And I think that was an old moniker. And I do think that because of the changes and the way things have gone financially, it comes down to being a savvy general manager, having a savvy organization. You can't just spend money. And I think that's where the Cowboys have struggled. Like you said, good, but not good enough.
Well, I know you didn't come on to talk about the Cowboys. Let's shift gears. I want to talk a little bit. There's a few things I want to cover. We've got some good user questions, and I'm sure we'll get some more. But there has been some injuries that have come out, right? And I want to start with a question that I saw debated elsewhere, and I want your opinion, Mike. Some people have said the injury situation, even with Christian McCaffrey, who is the clear number 1 overall pick for most people, has made some people say he should be 12th, 13th, 14th in the draft, that it's not worth taking that risk at number 1 overall. It's a calf injury. You don't know if once he finally gets on the field, whether that will actually hold up. Mm-hmm. So talk about that first, but talk about other injury related news that you think is worth keeping an eye on as a fantasy football player.
When you're playing fantasy football, I am not here to tell you should invest in this player or do it this way, 0 RB. We talked about last week. You have to make decisions. You make decisions in your life. I tell my children, best thing you can do is be a good decision maker. I don't know if Christian McCaffrey, Brian, is going to be injured this season. For years, we heard he was injury prone until he wasn't, and then he dominated. But I know that you have to assess your risk tolerance, and you have to assume that Christian McCaffrey may miss a couple games here or there throughout their entire season due to injury. But I can't assess injury risk unless it's a repeated soft tissue injury for someone who seems to have a history. It's a violent game. McCaffrey could miss a game or two, but he also dominates when he's there. So for certain players, would I move Christian McCaffrey down? No. If I wanted to draft a running back early and do a hero RB build, running back early, and then a bunch of wide receivers, he's a perfect candidate. If you want to go zero RB, maybe you don't take Christian McCaffrey because you're worried about that. So to me, it's a decision. Here are some injuries I think you should keep an eye on. I think Curtis Samuel is going to be the best receiver in Buffalo, or at least most productive this year for fantasy. Keon Coleman's a rookie. Khalil Shakir is a little undersized. He has a turf toe injury that's lingering. They open up against Arizona at home, which is a tricky game because Arizona fully healthy now. Kyler Murray last year, when he came back, they were very competitive. Curtis Samuel may miss that game or at least be limited. Turf toe is something you don't want to mess with. So I'd be careful with Curtis Samuel. If you had him, you have to monitor that as you get to the opening game there because he is going to be an integral part of that offense if he's healthy. Jonathan Brooks of Carolina, everyone knows he's going to be out with the ACL tear. He is now out 4 full games, at least going into the season. Why does that matter? Chuba Hubbard is going to be the lead running back there, and he's a great later round running back value. If you haven't drafted yet, or if you have him, you may want to start him that opening week at New Orleans. Spoiler alert, Brian. We'll get to that in a little bit about that Panthers-Saints game. Brock Bowers for the Raiders, dynamic rookie tight end, has a foot injury that is worth monitoring only because he's a tight end that a lot of people in redraft leagues or seasonal leagues are selecting as a starting tight end. You know, Michael Mayer is there for the Raiders as well. He's worth monitoring that as you go into that opening week as well. Is Bowers going to be healthy? Adam Hill from the Las Vegas Review-Journal mentioned that they had Brock Bowers, Brian, getting goal line carries in that offense during the preseason. So certainly a player, if he's healthy, could really pop and get some good production. Jalen Warren's hamstring for the Steelers looks like it's going to be a go. Looks like he's okay. He'll be ready for week 1. That is crucial because you saw Cordarrelle Patterson get carries and get receptions as well in the last preseason game. Warren on the field with Russ Wilson, obviously looking for the checkdowns, the short passes, going to be an integral part of the Steelers' attack as well. And the last one for the Patriots, Jacoby Brissett had a shoulder injury. Gerard Mayo mentioning that he would have come back in. I'm going to call BS on that one, Brian. I think that's a serious injury, and I wouldn't be surprised if Drake May starts week 1 or comes in fairly quickly. So those are sort of the key injuries that could play into your lineup decisions as you get ready for the opening week.
Yeah, we'll definitely keeping a close eye on the quarterback situation in New England as the Seahawks will be playing them in week 2. And they have at least even odds chance of starting the season playing 2 rookie quarterbacks. So we will see how that goes. Of those, any of those injuries that you think should change anyone's draft order, or just those are lineup based injuries?
They're lineup based. I would be concerned about Bowers. You know, rookie tight ends, Brian, didn't really perform well until last year. So does that mean last year is the start of a pattern or last year is the outlier? So Brock Bowers having an injury right away doesn't surprise me when rookies are a little banged up because they're coming into the NFL. Their level of training and competition is greater. Xavier Legette with the Panthers also injured. So I would be nervous about a rookie tight end at a position that there are some other options around him. David Njoku of the Browns, Jake Ferguson of the Cowboys. There's some other options there that I would be careful of, and I would bump him down a little bit. And probably, Brian, if you wait on quarterback, I don't know if Drake May is a terrible choice in a 2-quarterback league anymore. He does run a lot, and if he's the starting quarterback on a Patriots team that I just projected for FTN today is going to have 3 wins this year. That's a lot of negative game script. That's a lot of passing and a lot of opportunities. Remember, you and I are old enough to remember Blake Bortles was a top 5 fantasy quarterback with Jacksonville, and most of those points came in the second half when the Jaguars were trailing. So that Brissett injury is interesting because it would be Drake May, and all you want is opportunity with his rushing ability and big arm. could put up some nice points for you.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It's an interesting point. All right, I got to catch up on some amazing generosity going on in chat here. Donald Hester has gifted 5 memberships to the channel. Again, this is always my favorite thing that people do. It broadens the community. It feels good to do, and it also makes, I think, some connections. So everyone that gets gifted these is always incredibly grateful. And if you do get gifted a membership, really think about paying it forward. The way to do that, you can click join, and you want to be on desktop or on Android in order to be able to gift a membership. You also need to go there in order to receive a free membership. You have to have gifting turned on your profile. Ravaki, I'm going to go with Ravaki as the pronunciation, has gifted a membership. Thank you so much. I love this. Amy Holmes, I love seeing Amy on here, one of our members. She's gifted 5 memberships. It's just amazing, Mike. We've got a really, really generous and I think very caring crew that follows the show. So makes me happy. What a nice way to start.
Wonderful. A
Tuesday. All right, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit. We're not gonna get into the full preview of the Broncos Seahawks. We'll save that for next week. But talk a little bit from a Broncos perspective. Who are the fantasy players that someone might have in a lineup against the Seahawks in week 1?
Yeah, if you're the Seahawks, I would be careful with Jaleel McLaughlin. Samaje Perine released now, not part of the Broncos anymore. And there are some drum beats that happen in the preseason that we believe and others that we should ignore. I'm talking to you, Kenny Pickett, last year with the Steelers. But with Jaleel McLaughlin, superb pass catching back out of the backfield, certainly going to get the passing down work. You know, Bo Nix is not going to go to an aggressive rookie passing attack in his first game. So Sean Payton has had tremendous success throughout his entire career passing to running backs, Alvin Kamara, Mark Ingram. McLaughlin is going to be a huge part of this attack, and I think the Seahawks are going to have to really prioritize limiting him because he gets in there on third downs. He's great in space. He can attack. He works great out of shotgun formation. So watch out for Jaleel McLaughlin. It's a player that I wouldn't mind flexing against your Seahawks because I think he's going to see a lot of volume. Also, Courtland Sutton can be feast or famine for the Broncos, but is an elite end zone target. And Bo Nix has shown a strong connection with him early. He's going to him. No problem with the fade in the back of the end zone. Sutton, Brian, is not going to get 10 receptions for 160 yards, but he's a big play threat. Nix has a good arm, especially when you get in the red zone. He is a target there, so they may want to watch him as well in the end zone. And then I guess Bo Nix is the other option. If you're in a 2-quarterback league or you start him, definitely someone who saw some excitement in the preseason. Probably wouldn't be a play in a regular league for me, but those are the players that I would watch out for. There's some other fringe players, wide receiver, tight end, of course, but the one that popped in when you sent me this question is Jaleel McLaughlin. Now that Perine is not there, Audric Estime, the rookie, is not going to be the pass-catching back, and if the Seahawks get up in this game, McLaughlin is the one who's going to accumulate fantasy points, not Javonte Williams.
What about the Denver defense? I'm curious where they rank on your list.
You know, the Denver defense, and if you look last year at our DVOA, which we have here with Aaron Schatz, last year the Denver defense was very up and down. Their pass defense is certainly very strong, but I think they are vulnerable when you try to attack them on the ground, which I think Seattle will be able to have success with the entire game. So if you look at our DVOA with Aaron from last year and their defense and where they ranked, last year, Denver's defense certainly struggled overall. They ended up being 30th overall, but they did have success against the pass. They were 19th, which wasn't bad, but the run is where you can really attack them. So Kenneth Walker, even Zach Charbonnet, I think there's opportunities there to attack them on the ground. Their secondary is strong, but remember, a good secondary is based on a pass rush. So if Seattle can hold up on the offensive line, you can still find opportunities against that secondary. So I would expect for Seattle a strong rushing attack, trying to weaken that defense to take a shot. Nice pass we saw to DK Metcalf for the touchdown that last preseason game as well.
Yes, it was. And certainly, yeah, we could talk about that a little bit more. Why don't we for a second? Mike Sando's tiered quarterback list came out yesterday, and this is for, NFL front office people ranking quarterbacks. It's not a fantasy football thing, but they had Geno Smith ranked like tier 3, like Daniel Jones kind of level. And interestingly, I was looking at FTN and I was looking at the preseason projections, and it had Geno Smith as 25th on preseason projections behind Daniel Jones. Mike, I'm telling you, I'm giving you fantasy advice. That is the steal of the century. If that's where people have him ranked among quarterbacks, they're going to be surprised come the season.
Yeah, I after our last week, full disclosure, Brian, I did a couple best ball drafts and I made sure that I had Geno Smith in those best ball drafts.
There you go.
The issue with rankings is when you look at projections, and we do this at FTN Fantasy also, any ranker, when they go through statistical projections, going to give an exceptional amount of weight to the rushing ability. So Daniel Jones is someone who's going to project well with the rushing ability. But that being said, Geno has a tremendous amount of weapons. He's looked good. He looked healthy. I think health was a concern, Brian, a couple of weeks ago. We weren't sure. But I agree. I made sure to get some Geno Smith. I got some double stacks with DK Metcalf and JSN. I agree with you. I think that there's upside there. And if Geno stays healthy and everything's fine, he certainly can have a big year and outperform that ranking. The projections are going to skew to the rushing quarterbacks for sure.
That makes sense. So let's talk a little bit. I'm curious the process you go through for setting your fantasy lineups every week. Like, what do you check? What do you look at? How do you make decisions other than the guys? Obviously, you have some guys that are just like, I'm playing these guys every week. They're matchup proof. But for the harder choices, what are the things you look at?
We didn't plan this, but my first advice is exactly what you just said. There are certain players who you should not worry about the matchups. Last year, when Best Ball Mania was being drafted in Underdog Fantasy, everyone avoided the Cardinals because they ended up playing the Eagles, I think, on the road in week 15 or 14, whatever it was. There's no way that James Conner is going to be able to run against that Eagles rush defense, which 2 years ago was very good. Well, sure enough, James Conner was the overall RB2 that week. He had 2 touchdowns. Cardinals upset the Eagles on the road. So there are certain players that you just should not overthink, and you have to put them in there. That's number one. Number two is I set my lineup without looking at the games, who I think I should play. Step 3, I go to the games, I look at the point spreads, and I look at the totals. Because, Brian, it makes sense. Vegas, the reason those buildings are tall in Vegas is because they're pretty good at making those lines. You see higher total games, you're going to want exposure to players in those games. So I make sure that I have representation there. And finally, I look at specific matchups. So our DVOA, Aaron Schatz here at FTN, he has DVOA against wide receiver 1, against wide receiver 2, against wide receiver 3, tight ends, running backs, etc. Early in the season, obviously, that's rough because we don't have as much data. But as the season goes on, you will note that teams struggle to guard the opposing wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2, and that could swing me on certain matchups. So number 1, who are your must starts no matter what? Number 2, set your lineup without looking at the games, players that you like because you have feelings about them as well. 3, look at this point spreads, look at the total. And 4, look at some individual matchups. If you're not sure like which wide receiver to play or which backup running back, look at those matchups and help make your decision. And the final thing also that I do is I encourage you to ignore the projections on the website. You do your projections. Don't look at each one of the sites because those are just generic projections. Sometimes you see yourself losing by 20 points, but when you actually calculate it, you say, wait a minute, I think I'm going to win this matchup. So do your own projections and make your own lineups accordingly. Don't just trust the projections on a site specifically.
Yeah. So Mike, I'm going to share here. So this is FTN Fantasy. And again, the link is pinned in chat. You can join, use promo code HAWKS, and you get 15% off, less than $8 a month to get a Fantasy Football Plus package, or you can get the NFL VIP package. Either one will get you access to Stats Hub and all this great information. But I like looking at this as well, and I think this is something you kind of talk to. This is looking at QB adjust, like this is looking at adjusted performance based off matchups. So this is, if I look here, this is the defenses that had the most negative effect on QBs in this was last season, right? So Baltimore, Mike McDonald, everybody. Top of the list, negative 25% impact on their points, QB points per game. if you want to see where Seattle was a 5% accelerator positive to points if you're facing them. If you're facing the Washington Commanders, a 30% bump in what you could expect from a quarterback. For running backs, here you go and you say, well, interestingly, the Rams were negative 27% on that, and San Francisco was negative 21. Now, the interesting thing here, you kind of talked about this, Mike, is game script affects running back numbers. The 49ers, if you look at the DVOA numbers on FTNFantasy.com, were not a good run defense. But because they played ahead all year, the opposing team's running backs rarely got a chance to carry the ball in the second half of games. So playing your running backs, certain running backs against the 49ers, you kind of had to say, okay, well, I'm going to get about a fifth less of the points that I'd normally get. The thing on FTN, you can get wide receiver 1 adjustments, wide receiver 2 adjustments, and on and on and on. So, you get tight end adjustments. So, I think this kind of information you won't get other places, especially because it's factoring in DVOA, which nobody else has. And this is part of why I'm partnering with you guys, because I think what Aaron's done with DVOA is best of breed. And then the way you guys are factoring that into all this data, I'm going to be referencing it. And that's why I've been a member even before we started doing this stuff together. But I just want to give people a little view of kind of what I see there as well.
I appreciate that. And that's, for those that don't know, the adjusted part is very simple. Brian and I can tell you that we're averaging 5 touchdowns per game, but if we reveal that we played against a bunch of kindergartners and second graders, you're not going to be as impressed. So if you end up playing a very easy schedule early in the year, your numbers in terms of fantasy points against for your positions may be slightly skewed. So what adjusted does is gives you a baseline there so you can really accurately assess how each one of those positions is doing against the defense. And that's what we're looking for. And sometimes it may seem like it's overwhelming, but it's not. You get into a routine Sunday morning, grab your cup of coffee, and you go to certain pages on our site and make sure that you check it out. But that's exactly what it is. And your point was valid. If you're trailing a lot of times and you're not going to be able to run the ball, and you have 2 running backs on a team that's facing one of those defenses like the Niners last year, you may want to go with the pass catching back because you're going to assume that your team is down and they're going to be passing a lot more. And that's I appreciate you showing that. That's one of our favorite parts of the site.
All right. So I have to admit, Mike, I'm eager. You talked about the FTN model and for betting, and I don't think it's out yet.
Not yet. Next week. Yep.
Darn it. So I was browsing around. I was kind of trying to see what was going on. I did look at over under. So I used to go to a site called Vegas Insider that had a bunch of different things. You guys now are my go-to because you have all of that information on the FTN site. So I can go to FTN NFL betting and I get, where was it? I don't want the articles. I got to bring it back up. But I was able to find out for each team what the over under is, what the current odds are. Here it is. So I'm going to share my screen one more time.
Great.
So I was able to go here. You've got all the different, sites and what the different odds are. And I scroll down, and we talked about this a little bit last week. The Seahawks are 5.5 points. That's rich. That's rich. That's a lot of points. But it's pretty high up there. I'm also able to go there and see the over under for this. And it takes a few seconds to update, but I think the over under for the Seahawks game was 42, if I'm remembering correctly. And there it goes. Takes a little while. Let's give some feedback to the guys. I think they can make that a little faster. But the interesting thing here is it's even odds.
Yep.
It's even odds because they can't figure out whether it's going to be over or under that. So 42 seems like the exact right number. But I love this part of FTN as well. And so then soon enough, you're saying next week, we'll be able to have the model that has a little bit more information about predictions.
Yeah, Brian, we want to make sure that you're the one-stop shop. So you don't want to open your app for BetMGM and open your app for DraftKings and open your app for FanDuel. So you can just come to us and see all the odds and then make your choice that way. Our prop shop does the same thing. If you want to bet Jackson Smith and Jigba over receptions, you can just see where the best line is. And there's going to be a lot of variation, the juice, the number, etc. But next week, we will have on a page very similar to that, all of the games down the left side, and our projection and our edge. So if we find a 10% or higher edge, a double-digit percentage or higher edge, it is a play for us. And again, where this happened is last year, I told you, third week of the season, the biggest edge we have ever had in 4.5 years of FTN fantasy was the Cardinals getting the points at home against the Cowboys. I think it was 12, 14, whatever it was. It was such a strong edge because, again, Arizona had not played well. The Cowboys had looked real strong. It was week 3. Sure enough, Arizona won the game outright. That was the biggest edge that we ever had in FTN. So you'll see. Sometimes it's 0, sometimes it's 2. But if you get a double-digit edge, it's a play for us. Last year, double-digit edges hit over 65% of the time at FTN for not only sides, the totals as well.
Well, I am curious. Even though it's ahead of the model, are there any future bets that you're interested in? Like whether it's Super Bowl, division, player props, anything that's got kind of piqued your interest?
Yeah, first one, the hometown here. Jackson Smith and Jigba over 64.5 receptions. It's even money on both sides. You have talked about it. He was injured to start the year last year, came on strong. We feel he's possibly going to leapfrog Lockett and become the second target clearly in this passing attack. People are down on Geno. I like that one a lot. 64.5. I think he gets closer to 70, becomes an integral part, even more so than he was last year, of this offense. So that's the first one that I went with. I do think there's a chance that the Lions make the Super Bowl. That may blow people away. It's plus 550. I believe if you simulated, Brian, this season 5 times that the Lions will make the Super Bowl and win the NFC at least once. To me, that is a play. They were fantastic last year. Their schedule is very easy. I think they have 14 of their first 15 games at home. They could have home field advantage. They have one of the best offensive lines. They strengthen their defense, especially their run-stopping unit. Great weapons on offense. Jahmyr Gibbs looks healthy. I think they're worth a play. I also think San Francisco is going to regress as well. So that mixed into that as well.
Can I pause you for a second?
Sure.
So for folks that always get this confused, plus 550 means if you bet $100, you would get 550 in return.
You would get 650.
650 in return.
You would get your 100 back plus the 550. That is correct. Yes.
There you go. Yep. Just want to make sure. Thank you.
Commanders plus 900 to win the NFC East is another one. I just talked this morning on one of my pods. We had Mike Renner on from CBS. One of the teams that finished last in their division last year is going to win their division. It's happened for 19 straight years, 19 of the last 20, if you will. And I think Washington has a chance to be that team. I'm fading the Cowboys. We talked about that. I am not impressed with the Giants. And are we sure that the Eagles are going to be as good as advertised, especially without Jason Kelce on the offensive line? So I think the Commanders are worth a flyer. We have seen Jaden Daniels, a player like Jaden Daniels, which was Robert Griffin about a decade ago with Washington. They ended up winning the division with him. He's versatile. They have the passing attack. Dan Quinn is a good defensive coach. He can make the defense even better than it was last year under Ron Rivera. So I think the Commanders are a good flyer at plus 900 to win the NFC East. If you don't like that, pick another team. Maybe the Panthers, maybe Cincinnati. People like Cincinnati because their schedule is easy. But one of those teams, Brian, that finished last is going to win their division. And I think the Commanders are a decent bet.
That's bold. I love those. And I think, like I've said before, I'm not a betting guy. I generally have found for myself, especially related to the Seahawks, I can't do it because it hurts my heart too much. A lot of people cover themselves by betting the opposite. So if something goes wrong for Seattle, at least they feel good that they won something. All my friends do it all the time. But, if I was betting, and when I have betted, put a bet down, it's always something that's going to have a big return because I'm not that interested in, putting up $100 and getting 110 back. That's not that exciting for me. So
no, and you want something with upside. Absolutely.
Yeah, you want a thrill of victory there. We do have a couple new members I want to welcome. Eric Davison, welcome to the crew. Great to have you. Thank you for joining. Jess Honcoop, welcome as a new member. Love seeing new people join, expanding the family. So good stuff there. Any other bets that we missed, or do you cover the ones you like there?
Last one I'll tell you is I understand the Chiefs have won the Super Bowl 2 years in a row. But if you look at that division, there's Denver, which obviously is rebuilding. There's the Raiders, who I'm not high on at all. And how about a Charger team that every year was supposed to be a lot better than people thought they were? Now they have a new coach. Justin Herbert looks healthy. Great offensive line. Jim Harbaugh has found success. Plus 350 to win the AFC West. Would we be shocked if the Chargers beat the Chiefs? And they usually play the Chiefs well, Brian. You remember years ago, Mike Williams had 3 touchdown catches at Kansas City. So they play the Chiefs well. They have the second easiest schedule per projected Vegas win totals of any team in the league. And they're plus 350. So that's another one I'm taking a flyer on.
Interesting. All right. Well, maybe it's a week too early for this, but what would be for people that do enjoy adding a little sports betting to their week? What are some tips for using FTN Fantasy to get some advantage there?
The 2 best parts about FTN Fantasy for betting are first the model, which again runs 10,000 simulations. So it's just something you can look at and say, wow, I'm surprised that's an edge. Maybe take a deeper dive in a bet that you like. And the second thing is our Discord. It's rapid reaction. Our experts, when they see an edge, right now US Open is starting. We have a person named Josh Gross, who's the best tennis bettor I've ever seen in my life. As soon as he sees a line that he thinks is wrong, he puts it in the Discord, and that line's going to move within 5 to 10 minutes. So the ability to discuss bets back and forth. For me, I'm a college basketball fan as well. March Madness, Brian, is just incredible. But we see those lines come out, and we put them in the Discord for subs right away before we even bet them ourselves. And you get access to that as well. So the betting models, which will be live next week when I come on, we'll have them up. I'll be able to talk about them. And to our Discord, where you can get that line immediately before it moves. Because when Josh, for example, bets a tennis line, it's gone. But he correctly hit, I believe it was like a plus 1,100 on who won the women's gold medal in the Olympics. He hit it right away. So that is the advantage of FTN. Come join our community. It's a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, again, for people considering doing that, you're going to want to join at ftnfantasy.com and use promo code HAWKS. Use promo code HAWKS to get 15% off. It will get you access. You want to make sure that you are joining with Fantasy Football Plus at least. That's less than $8 a month with the promo code HAWKS, and get you access to all this great stuff, including stuff on the betting as well. So definitely recommend doing that. I am a subscriber. So just to be very clear, and I was a subscriber prior to doing any business with FTN. All right, let's take some user questions, some listener questions. And every week we take patron questions. So people over at patreon.com/hawkblogger get to submit questions for Mike, as well as YouTube club level members or higher. And we've got a few questions for you this week. First one comes from Jordan Farrell. Who are your favorite betting picks for week 1?
These are ones that I've made already. Again, we'll check the model next week. First off, double digits with the Bengals is too much. I am not high on the Patriots, and they have offensive line issues, but 9 points, and it's sort of inching up to 10, is way too much against the Bengals, who still don't have Jamar Chase as a regular contributor. I have questions about their defense as well. Pats +9 right now at Cincinnati. Second one is a money line play, even for me, Brian. I think the Panthers are going to beat the Saints in New Orleans. I like Carolina. I think they're improved. Dave Canales did a great job with Tampa Bay last year. 4.5. It's over that magic number of 3. Whenever you can get over 3 or get over 7, 8, something like that, it's a pretty key number. 4.5 is way too much. I even like it as a money line play. And the last 2 left. This one makes me nervous. I would not say this is one of my favorites, and I'm dying to see what the model says on it. I like the Texans -1.5 at Indy. If you look historically, home divisional underdogs do very well in week 1, but I do think the Texans defense is just that much better. And I've seen enough issues with Anthony Richardson that while I know this will be a close game, I could see the Texans with a late interception salting away a 3-point victory. So it's only 1.5. I'm fine with that. And I do like Tennessee getting 4.5 at Chicago. It is the first game for Caleb Williams. Both teams have a good run defense. Would not be surprised if this game was a field goal game. And again, we're looking at that magic 4.5. So 3 underdogs and 1 favorite that makes me nervous. Those are my plays so far for week 1, but I'll be back next week and we'll check the model, see what they say.
Interesting. Yeah, the Anthony Richard thing is fascinating to me. Certainly a guy that you'd think would have some fantasy value with his running ability, but there was people that were just super, super high on him in the draft and were desperate for the Seahawks to take him. I was so grateful that the Colts made that pick, so we never had to have the discussion about whether the Seahawks should have picked Anthony Richardson. But I'm really happy we have Devin Witherspoon. So that's not the quarterback I would want to be betting my future on.
Brian, my issue with Richardson is he only had 1 year of college success as a quarterback, and that reminded me of a wide receiver who was just cut, Kadarius Toney. I get leery of college players with just 1 year of success, even if it's their final year, because if they were good enough, they would have found a way to produce before then. Richardson is a dynamic player, but is his passing accuracy good enough to keep that rushing upside on the field, which he has? And can he stop the turnovers? I have my questions with that.
All right. Next listener question. This is a long one from Alvi. Okay. Keeper league. Take a second to explain for people that don't know. What's a keeper league?
There's different types of fantasy leagues, but a keeper league is where you don't have to turn over your roster every year. That if you draft players and you identify a player in a later round that ends up being a strong player, like in this example, I believe we're going to talk, or maybe that's a future one, talking about Kyron Williams. This is one exactly. So Kyron Williams was a late round pick last year, and he ended up being the starting running back for the Rams. So you can keep 1, 2, 3 of your players from your prior year and carry them over, sort of rewarding you for being able to find someone with a later round pick.
All right. So in this case, the setup continues. Justin Jefferson is an 11-round keeper for me. What does that mean?
I think that means that they got Justin Jefferson years ago in a later round. God bless them if they did. So certainly you're keeping one of the best wide receivers in the NFL with a later round pick for sure.
Got it. So I have one more keeper slot with 2 options. I can go Jamar Chase, who is a 4th-round keeper, or I can go Kyron Williams as a last-round keeper. Who should I keep, Chase or Kyron?
I'm going to keep Kyron Williams, but I would really try to get Blake Corum as the backup running back. Running backs do get hurt, but Kyron Williams was spectacular. He was the overall running back 2 in fantasy last year, trailing only Christian McCaffrey. And in some formats, he was 2. Some he was 3 with Raheem Mostert. I would keep Corum with Williams because he is a later round pick. He's a last round keeper. I know Chase is fantastic, but he still hasn't practiced yet. He's kind of there in a practice jersey. There are the contract issues. Could he sit out? I doubt it, but I don't like players who have not gone through regular preseason because they could get soft tissue injuries and miss a couple games. Why take that risk? I would keep Kyron, try to draft Blake Corum. You have locked up the Rams backfield, which should give you running back 1 production every single week, and try to get a wide receiver to replace Chase. Could you get Chris Olave? Could you get DK Metcalf? And then support that with Justin Jefferson while locking up an elite running back duo if you can get Corum.
Another question. These are both from Alvi, so I'm just going to finish Alvi's questions together. If I choose one or the other, then what position do I target in round 1 if I have Jefferson as my other keeper? So I think you kind of answered that, but go ahead.
Have to get the wide receiver because there is a drop off, Brian, between those elite wide receivers and what you can get later on. I mean, there's a chasm of a difference between DK Metcalf and Rashid Shaheed, but there are running backs later that I think you can find, Brian Robinson, players like that, Gus Edwards with the Chargers, that can make up that difference for running back, but you cannot make up that elite production with a wide receiver.
So we'll continue with questions in a second. I just want to share some news that is relevant here. A couple things that jumped out at me. So the Texans are releasing wide receiver Noah Brown. This is a guy that put up some yards last year, almost 600 yards receiving. So it'll be interesting to find out where he ends up. The Browns are going to field trade offers for Jameis Winston and Tyler Huntley. Both of those guys, I mean, Jameis Winston obviously has a lot of starts, becomes an interesting guy just to monitor, not necessarily for fantasy, but just relative to where he goes. Tyler Higbee of the Rams will start the year on PUP. That's not a surprise, but a pretty prominent tight end for a division rival and for a lot of fantasy teams is going to be on PUP to start. Curious on that note, Mike, how do you handle PUP guys that could be valuable later in the season?
They're only valuable to me if I can get them later. So TJ Hawkinson is someone that I'm gravitating towards because it depends with your league how they react. The league that I'm in, my home league I just drafted last night, they go crazy over injuries. They don't want injured players. Jamar Chase dropped to a point where it was almost crazy. Now he's not injured, but he's not in camp. So it depends on where they fall. If a PUP player such as Higbee falls to a round that I think is reasonable, I would take him. Now, I don't have a ton of interest in Higbee, but to your point, that type of player is interesting if they fall 3 or 4 rounds below where their ADP should be.
Helpful. All right. So this next question comes from Jeffrey. He says, any advice or strategy for an auction style draft? And can you explain for folks that don't know, what is an auction style draft?
So instead of going in order where you're sort of a victim of the draft order, wherever you end up being 1 to 12, and then you reverse it and you just go in order drafting people per if your spot is up, an auction draft, a player is put out there. DK Metcalf is put out and people start bidding on that player. They're given a certain amount of money and they bid for that player. So really it favors strategy. It favors managing your budget. You can't spend too much money on one specific position. So some people like that. It takes longer, but it's a lot of fun. We were at the Fantasy Football Expo and our Jeff Radcliffe was in an auction draft with an actual auctioneer. It was very enjoyable.
You guys have I was poking around like an auction tool, right? That you can put in the rules and it will calculate and give you spit out for you some information. Yeah.
Yes. And we're almost ready with League Sync where you can put in your league, your actual fantasy league and your settings, and we can give you advice for those specific leagues. So yeah, we want to be able to make it easy for you when you go to your drafts. Yep.
Another bit of news before I want to make sure I got your answer to the question and I might have interrupted, but Ugo Amadi, former Seahawk, has been released by the New Orleans Saints. So just another name that I think folks have known. The reason it's kind of interesting is the Seahawks may have a issue with nickel, depending on what happens with Artie Burns. I don't think Ugo Amadi is an option, but just a name to be aware of. All right, so your advice for auction style?
I took it straight from Jeff Radcliffe's article here on our site. Couple key things you should remember. One, budget allocation is the key. What do I mean by that? Spend 5% of your budget on quarterback because it's a very deep position, 40% of your budget, give or take, on running back, 45% on wide receiver, and 10% on tight end. So if you look at your money, which is usually, Brian, $200, that's just general standard, you want to use that amount of money to formulate those areas for your team. Make sure you calculate your auction values. If we end up having a price, for example, on Christian McCaffrey, and we say that he's worth $35 out of the 200, Brian, if he ends up going for $45 or $50, what that is doing is raising the value of the other players after that. And you're now getting a deal because you did not spend on Christian McCaffrey. So you want to get players that fall under where you project they should be, much like stocks. Know your league's tendencies. Make sure you know who's going to put quarterbacks as a priority, who's running backs. What you could do is then nominate players because they get nominated in any order. So if I know, Brian, that you love taking quarterbacks early and you're more apt to use a lot of your budget to get an elite quarterback, I'm going to keep nominating quarterbacks early to try to get you to spend your money so that I have an advantage over you later in the draft. And finally, make sure you pay attention to what everyone else is doing, because if you realize that you have not drafted a tight end yet and everyone else has, you can wait on that position and get a good value late. Just some tips from Jeff on an article here at FTN.
All right. Next question comes from Eric. There seems to be a prominent strategy to defer on drafting running backs until later rounds. But when I look at rankings, I see a lot of running backs ranked high. Is there a situation where it makes sense to draft multiple running backs early?
You may have the most intelligent subscribers that I've seen on any show. It's a great question. The answer to that one for Eric is I don't like the wide receivers that are going early in round 2. I don't like that group of receivers, Devontae Adams, players like that. So in those situations where I draft in the back half of round 1, I am double selecting running backs. I can get Saquon Barkley and Jonathan Taylor. I can get Isaiah Pacheco and Taylor or someone like that. Those situations, if it's a PPR setting, you want to get Jahmyr Gibbs because he can get 80 receptions. I'm fine with that also. So yes, running backs that catch passes are always going to be at the top of everyone's rankings, but I take 2 running backs when I'm drafting at the back end of round 1. I don't feel comfortable if my team has Puka Nacua and Marvin Harrison at the end of the first 2 rounds, so I'll double tap running back and try to get an advantage on everyone else who's prioritizing wide receiver.
Another name, a familiar name, the Commanders are releasing wide receiver Martavis Bryant, formerly a guy that you'd want in fantasy, not necessarily any longer. Ben Skoranek, also a name that a number of people know, was released as well. All right, last, at least pre-submitted question comes from Rick, and this is, which player and consensus top 15 guy would you not draft?
I am not drafting Devon Achane to the Dolphins. I am not selecting a running back early in the draft that is in a timeshare situation. I understand he was explosive. I understand he was elite. He's versatile. They're using him as a receiver. Raheem Mostert is still there, who had 20 touchdowns last year. And the coach, McDaniel, has told us that Raheem is the RB1. But people are going to force the square, the square in the square peg in the round hole repeatedly because they want Devon Achane to be this explosive player. Even if there's an injury, Brian, Jalen Wright was drafted from Tennessee as a running back as well. I don't see a situation where Achane is an elite running back. Do I think his PPR ability and explosive ability could make him a top 20 or top 15 back? Of course I do. But there's still the injury risk on a diminutive running back. He's still part of an offense that has to feed Tyreek Hill, has to feed Jalen Waddle, has Raheem Mostert at the goal line, and I'm supposed to spend a first or early second-round pick on Devon Achane? No, thank you.
That's interesting. And the Seahawks are going to get a look at Miami in week 3, and I am fascinated. I'm hoping that we're 2-0 heading into that game, and it's a home game, and we get to see what that matchup looks like. Unfortunately, it seems unlikely Uchenna Nwosu will be available, which is a shame. The Dolphins will be missing Bradley Chubb, but the Nwosu injury is particularly troublesome for that game because so many of the Dolphins' rushing yards come to the outside. They test the edges. They like to get the running backs out on the edge, and Nwosu is a key part of setting the Seahawks' edge in run defense. We saw the Seahawks' run defense fall apart last year when Nwosu was lost for the year with a pec injury. So that's going to be a really fun game to be at. I can't wait to attend that game, but it's one that I'm having a tough time prognosticating without a little bit more information about how that Dolphins offensive line is going to perform, how that Dolphins defense is going to look. I feel like that team in general is a little hard to read. They have elite talent, but they also have not really gotten over the top the last few years.
Yeah, they struggle with the cold weather late in the year. I just put out an article on FTN this morning. I'm predicting the wins and losses of every team in each division for the next 8 days. Started today with the AFC East, had them tied with the Jets at 12-5, but they sweep the Jets, so I end up putting them as the division champion. But that is the issue, is they have speed, but there's questions on the offensive line. The defense has to improve. I like Achane, Brian. I just don't see him as an early pick. He's not going to be on the field enough, and you're banking on efficiency, remarkable efficiency, which probably will regress a bit. If he was the lead running back, I get it. I have concerns at that area.
Yeah. Gonna be interesting. My gosh, Mike. Oh, I can't. In some ways, it's nice to have the week break between now and when we really get into preseason, week 1 prep. But it feels weird. It feels like there should be football games coming this weekend, but instead we've got this kind of dead week of just sitting around, biding our time and waiting for the real stuff to start next week.
Yeah, calm before the storm. Get your lineup set, get ready. But we do have 2 games during the week next week, so we're excited about that. The one in Brazil and the opener, of course, Chiefs and Ravens.
That's true. I wish. I mean, it's nice that the Seahawks have kind of claimed Germany as their kind of international place. It's a good place to visit. Would definitely go the next time they're there, but I wish it was Brazil.
Of course.
I would like to have the excuse to be going to Brazil more often.
Although Brian, your background would not be allowed there. There's of course the issue with the color green, which is going on, which is why the Packers and the Eagles have to have alternate sort of uniforms, because I guess green is something that signifies some unfortunate gang activity in the area. So they've had some issues. So you may have to go in a different uniform, evidently, if you were in Brazil, because green is something that's caused some trouble.
Interesting. Yeah. I actually had not followed that. Okay. We do have one more question. If we can take this for you, Mike. This comes from Travis Miles. Which rookie wide receiver has the best fantasy upside this year? Anyone jump out to you?
Yeah, Travis, I'll give you two. Malik Neighbors here in the New York area has really popped. He's been able to score and make plays in practice on the scrimmages against the other team starters. Against Detroit, he torched them. I know Daniel Jones is Daniel Jones, but even you saw in the preseason game, he's going to get peppered with targets. I think Neighbors could absolutely have a huge year. And the one that I'm sort of looking at in the back end, not going to surprise you the way I've been talking, Ladd McConkey of the Chargers could be this year's Puka Nacua. Josh Palmer is Josh Palmer. He's fine, but McConkey could be a 60, 70 reception-like player, great in PPR formats. I think with his 4.3 speed, he can really explode, and he's atop the depth chart right now with the Chargers.
Those are great ones, and I'll just remind folks, go over to ftnfantasy.com. The link is pinned to chat, and use promo code HAWKS. Make sure you sign up for Fantasy Football Plus or NFL VIP. That the Fantasy Football Plus is less than $8 a month with the promo code HAWKS. Gets you 15% off. Gets you all of the DVOA. Gets you the Stats Hub. Gets you access to the Discord channel, to fantasy football cheat sheets, all this stuff. It's a great place. I'm super excited to be partnering with FTN Fantasy all year long. And Mike, it has been so fun to have another week with you going through fantasy football. Next week, we'll be able to talk about real games, real lineups, real odds. And I honestly, I just want to hit the fast forward button to get to next week.
Oh, I can't wait. This is the highlight of my week every week, Brian. I love being on the show with you. Can't wait for next week. We'll have odds and percentages and all fun stuff, projections, talk about props. Can't wait.
Awesome. All right, everybody. That was Mike Randle. Thank you, Mike, coming on every week throughout the season to help us with our fantasy football questions, to help us with sports betting if you're into that. And, I do not play fantasy football and I do not bet. So I'll just be totally clear on that. I'm still a subscriber to FTN. And I still enjoy the conversations. Some of the cool things about fantasy football and sports betting is it takes you out of your, kind of myopic view of just your team and gets you around the league a little bit more, thinking about what's going on and what the storylines are. I mean, there's other reasons it's fun too, but I just really enjoy those conversations, and I can't wait to talk to Mike all year. He's a great guy, and that's the other thing that's cool is the folks over at FTN. Aaron, you've heard him on the show. Really solid guy, smart guy. Other people I've met over there, it's a good crew, and so it makes it really easy for me to promote them and to partner with them. And I'm pitching them an idea that could help maybe clear the path for me going to Detroit to cover the Detroit game. So keep an eye on that. But the more love that you guys give to FDN, the better it will be. I can promise you that. And you get a benefit out of it. So make sure you go to ftnfantasy.com, sign up for the Fantasy Football VIP, Fantasy Football Plus or VIP. Fantasy Football Plus is less than $8 a month with promo code HAWKS. All right, folks, I'm going to probably, I'm trying to decide how I'm going to handle it today. So I'm open to input, but this show, the one we're just doing right now, is focused on the fantasy football stuff. So people that find this after the live, they find it later and they watch it on replay, they're going to be coming here to watch the fantasy football thing. So I think I'm going to close this show, but I believe I'm probably going to open another show sometime either this morning or later today, where I'm just going to be talking about the cuts that are going on and other things and hanging out real time. So keep an eye out. Again, you want to click subscribe, and click the bell to get notified, because that'll let you know when I go live. I'm not scheduling these things. I can't tell you exactly when or if it will happen, but I would recommend that you guys keep an eye out for that. Also, for folks that are interested in getting one of these free subscriptions that are getting memberships that are getting handed out, clicking like and subscribing and having the bell on, all of those things factor in to the algorithm for YouTube to determine who gets the free memberships, because the way that they determine the free memberships is based on who's the most engaged on the channel that doesn't already have a free membership. So the more you watch, the more you like, the more you subscribe and click the bell, the better your chances are of being someone who gets a free membership. I also want to make sure, folks, tomorrow is Wednesday. If you didn't know it, tomorrow is Wednesday. All the days are blurring together for me, but Wednesday night, 6 p.m. So tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Pacific time, we are doing the Real Hawk Talk 2024 prediction show. And it is going to be fun. We're going to have everybody on the show. Evan, Jeff, Nathan, Derek, Dana, Trey, and Josh Cashman. All going to be there. It's going to be chaos. It's going to be fun in the best way. We're going to go through all sorts of random predictions, some of which have been submitted by Patron members or by YouTube members, some of which have been mine. We're going to go through each week of the season, our win-loss predictions, what our totals for the season are, where we think the season will end. So definitely mark your calendars tomorrow evening, 6 p.m. Also, there's going to be some player press conferences today. Keep an eye out. I might have some content around that. I mentioned yesterday I was going to talk to Pharaoh Brown. That didn't work out for yesterday. Don't worry, we're going to talk. We wanted to do it in person, and so hopefully either sometime this week or soon we'll make that happen. And looking forward to catching up with the new Seahawks tight end. And then also tomorrow, critical thing tomorrow is John Schneider is going to be available for a press conference. I cannot wait. I have a bunch of questions to ask John Schneider. I think he's going to laugh when he sees me as someone to ask questions, as we've interacted in other ways in the past. He's going to probably have a trouble keeping a straight face, but we'll see. He might give me some crap. We'll see about that too. Thursday is when Mike McDonald will be available to press, so we'll talk to him then, but looking forward to seeing what comes from that. With that, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. It's been fun as always. Hope you enjoyed it as well. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram, which, by the way, we're over 600 followers. I'd love to get up to 1,000. So if you can open up Instagram real quick, find Hawk Blogger and click follow, I would greatly appreciate it. And then, I will see you all very soon. And this particular episode has been episode 156, 156 straight days of Seahawks content for you in the morning. Take care, y'all. I'll see you all soon.